Today on Bench Briefs, we're looking at a recent Supreme Court of Canada decision that dives deep into how criminal law principles are applied when the stakes are high. The case is RV Saddleback, a 2026 ruling that challenges us to think about evidence, fairness, and the interpretation of the law in criminal prosecutions. So, what happened here? The accused, known as Saddleback, faced criminal charges under Canadian law. While the details are complex, at its core, this case revolves around what Saddleback was alleged to have done, how law enforcement gathered evidence, and the procedural steps that led all the way up to the Supreme Court. The exact nature of the alleged offense isn't spelled out in headline terms, but it involved actions serious enough to warrant criminal charges and thorough scrutiny by the courts. In the lead up to the Supreme Court hearing, the case passed through various levels of the justice system. Along the way, questions arose about the evidence presented. Was it enough to prove guilt beyond a reasonable doubt? Was it gathered and admitted properly? And did the procedures followed respect the rights of the accused? These are the kinds of questions that often define criminal trials. But in Saddleback's case, they took on a new level of complexity. Now, the Supreme Court was tasked with some big questions. First up was how to interpret the relevant statutes that applied to the charges against Saddleback. Laws can sometimes be vague or open to different readings, so the court needed to clarify exactly how the criminal provisions should be understood in this context. Next, the court looked closely at the evidence. Was it admissible, meaning was it legally acceptable to be considered in court? And was it sufficient to meet the high standard required to convict someone of a crime? Remember, in criminal law, the burden is on the prosecution to prove guilt beyond a reasonable doubt, which is a high bar designed to protect the innocent. Beyond the evidence itself, the court also considered constitutional issues raised by the defense. This often involves questions about whether the accused's rights were upheld throughout the process. For example, was there a breach of procedural fairness? Were any rights under the Charter of Rights and Freedoms implicated? The court's role is to ensure that justice is done not only substantively, but also fairly. Another critical element was the application of precedent. Canadian courts rely heavily on past decisions to guide current rulings. So the Supreme Court reviewed how prior cases should influence the outcome here. This ensures consistency and predictability in the law, which are cornerstones of our legal system. Why does this case matter? R.V. Saddleback underscores the delicate balance courts must strike between enforcing criminal laws and safeguarding individual rights. It highlights how important it is for evidence to be both legally obtained and sufficient to support a conviction, reinforcing the principle that it's better for guilty persons to go free than for innocent ones to be wrongly convicted. Moreover, this decision clarifies how statutory provisions should be interpreted when ambiguities arise, providing guidance not just for future cases like Saddleback's, but for the criminal justice system as a whole. It also reaffirms the vital role of procedural fairness, ensuring that every accused person receives a fair trial in accordance with the Constitution. In practical terms, this ruling may affect how law enforcement conducts investigations, how prosecutors build their cases, and how defense lawyers challenge evidence and procedure. It's a reminder that the legal process is as much about protecting rights as it is about punishing wrongdoing. Thanks for tuning in to this episode of Bench Briefs. We hope you found this exploration of R.V. Saddleback both informative and thought-provoking. Be sure to join us next time as we unpack another important case shaping Canadian law. Until then, take care.